Have you ever sat at the edge of your bed, staring into the stillness of the evening, and quietly asked yourself, when did it become so one-sided? When did all the giving, the helping, the listening, the watching, the cooking, the caring start to feel like a job you never clock out of? You give because it's who you are. It's what you've always done. Not out of obligation, not because anyone forced you, but because love has always moved through your hands. Through hot meals, through birthday cards, through middle-of-the-night phone calls and long drives to appointments that weren't even yours. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. You still give, you still say yes, but now there's an ache behind it, a question that you haven't said out loud yet. When will someone ask about me? That ache is real, and it's not selfish. It's a quiet truth that deserves to be heard. Frank, a widower in his early 70s, used to laugh about being the family helper. He fixed broken doors, lent money when the kids were short, drove his grandkids to school when their parents were running late. But one afternoon, after dropping off his grandson and sitting in a parked car, he realized he couldn't remember the last time someone had asked him how he was doing. Not out of politeness, but really asked, really listened. That moment stayed with him because it was the first time he recognized the cost of always giving without being refilled. And maybe that's you, too. Maybe you're starting to feel like everyone around you assumes you'll always be there. Always say yes, always step in, and when you don't, or even hesitate, the disappointment in their eyes stings more than it should. Grace felt it every time her daughter asked her to babysit the kids, but never stayed for a real visit. Grace would cook, she'd clean up toys, she'd rock her granddaughter to sleep. But when it came time for a conversation, a real one, her daughter would glance at the clock, mumble a thank you, and rush out the door. And Grace, standing in the hallway with a warm plate of food still on the stove, would wonder if she was seen only as a service, not a person. The world doesn't always notice the quiet ones, the consistent ones, the givers, because you make it look easy. You never make a scene. You carry so much without asking for credit. But here's the truth. Even the strongest hearts grow weary when they're only ever pouring out. You deserve to be filled, too, not with grand gestures, not with praise, but with presence, with care, with someone sitting across from you and saying, "Tell me about your day." So what happens when you reach that point? When you've given for so long, and the giving starts to hollow you out? What happens when you start wondering whether love should really feel this lopsided? That's where something powerful begins to stir. Not bitterness, not rage, but quiet clarity. A whisper that says, "I matter, too." It's what Helen felt when she stopped by her daughter's house to drop off a casserole and heard her say, half joking, half not, "You really do love dropping things off. Huh, you're like the family Uber Eats." Helen smiled, but on the drive home, her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel because she wasn't just dropping off food. She was offering love in the only language she knew how, and it wasn't being received. Not really, not deeply. That's when something shifted in her. She didn't stop caring, but she started wondering what would happen if she gave just a little less and waited to be met halfway. That's not selfish. That's self-respect. There's a quiet difference between giving from love and giving to stay relevant, between helping because you want to and helping because you're afraid they won't come around otherwise. And it's okay to admit that you've slipped into the second one without meaning to. Many people do, especially after 60, when your role in the family changes, when your house gets quieter, when you begin to wonder what you're still needed for. But here's the thing, you are needed, not just for what you give, but for who you are, for your stories, your laugh, your quiet wisdom, your presence. And when people stop seeing that, when they start treating your giving as routine, as expected, as owed, you have every right to pause, to step back, to choose differently, to say, even softly, even just to yourself, "I don't want to keep giving if I'm disappearing while I do." It starts with noticing when you feel drained after helping, noticing when the thank yous are missing, noticing when you're doing more than your share, not out of joy, but out of fear of being forgotten, fear of being left out, fear of being alone. But you are not alone, and you are not here to earn love with exhaustion. There is another way, a gentler, stronger way, A way where you still give, but from fullness, not from depletion. Where you help, but with boundaries, not with bitterness. Where your yes means something, because your no is allowed, too. And when you begin to walk that path, something begins to shift. Not just in how others treat you, but in how you treat yourself. Not just in how others treat you, but in how you treat yourself. Because at some point, you realize you've been holding the door open for everyone else, while quietly locking yourself out. It's not something that happens all at once. It happens in tiny, repeated choices. You say yes when you want to say maybe. You show up early to help clean, but stay late to tidy what others leave behind. You give your time, your energy, your attention, while yours goes unnoticed. That pattern doesn't make you weak. It makes you kind. But kindness without balance becomes a slow erasure. Margaret learned this the hard way. She had been the glue of her family for decades, organizing birthdays, hosting holidays, checking in on everyone's health, remembering everyone's appointments. But she realized something strange one afternoon, while eating a sandwich alone at her kitchen table. If she stopped calling, would anyone notice? It wasn't said out of self-pity. It was said with deep honesty, and it hit her like a quiet wave. She had become the constant, always reaching out, always following up, while those she loved had begun to drift into the comfort of being cared for without giving anything back. That day, she did something different. She didn't call, not out of anger, but out of curiosity. 3 days passed. No one called her. On the 4th day, she got a text from her son. "You okay? Haven't heard from you." And in that moment, something in her shifted. Because he didn't say, "I miss you." He didn't ask, "How are you?" He was just reacting to her absence, not reaching toward her heart. That's when Margaret began the quiet journey back to herself. Not by shutting down, but by choosing differently. She stopped doing everything out of habit. She asked herself, before every yes, a simple question: am I giving from joy or from fear? That question became her compass. And that's the second thing to remember. You get to check in with yourself every time. Before you commit, before you offer, before you overextend, you are allowed to pause, to breathe, to consider. You don't owe anyone your automatic yes. Jack had always believed that being a good grandfather meant never saying no. So when his daughter asked him to pick up the kids after school 3 times a week, he did, even when he was tired, even when he had plans. At first, it felt good, like he mattered. But one day, when he had to cancel a long-awaited doctor's appointment just to make it work, something cracked inside him, not in anger and sadness. He realized he was shaping his life around everyone else's needs, and no one was shaping theirs around his. So he sat down with his daughter and said, "I love the kids, but I need time for me, too." She didn't understand at first. She even got defensive, but Jack didn't argue. He just held his ground with kindness. And that's the third piece of this quiet change. Speak up. Even if your voice trembles, you don't need to justify your limits, but you do need to honor them. Your time matters. Your rest matters. And when someone acts disappointed by your boundary, it's not a reflection of your failure. It's a reflection of what they've grown used to and what needs to change. Sophie used to host Sunday dinners every week, rain or shine. Whether she was feeling well or not, it became expected, not appreciated. And the day she said she needed a break, one of her grandkids joked, "But who's going to make the lasagna now?" She smiled softly and said, "Someone else will have to." And just like that, she took her seat at the table, not as the hostess, not as the help, but as a guest. For the first time in years, she was served instead of serving. And that brings us to something else many forget after years of giving. It's okay to receive. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to trade it. You don't have to feel guilty. Receiving is not weakness, it's balance. And balance is how love breathes. Grace, who had always been the one to offer rides, to cover the bill, to show up early and stay late, once told her daughter gently, "I miss being taken care of." It was hard to say. Her throat tightened around the words, but she meant it. And slowly, her daughter started noticing the small things again, making tea when Grace came over, offering her the best seat, asking how her week had been. It wasn't perfect, but it was something, because when you speak your truth gently, Calmly, the people who love you will hear it. Maybe not immediately, but eventually, they will adjust. And the ones who don't, well, they were never really listening to begin with. So if you've been giving for years and feel like your cup is empty, know this: your needs are not a burden. You are not here to be everyone's support system without ever having your own. You are not selfish for wanting reciprocity. You are not wrong for asking to be seen. This is your life. 2. Your time, your energy, your one precious body and soul. And it is more than okay to start choosing yourself quietly, gently, but firmly. And it is more than okay to start choosing yourself quietly, gently, but firmly. Because the truth is, the more you live from that place of quiet self-respect, the more your world begins to reflect it back to you. Not always immediately, not always in the ways you expect, but something shifts not just around you, but within you. You begin to walk differently, breathe differently, respond differently. You stop chasing appreciation and start embodying worth. Frank said he felt it first when he sat through a conversation where he wasn't being heard. And instead of trying harder to explain himself, he simply stopped talking. Not in anger, just in peace. He said, "It felt like I'd finally given myself permission to stop begging to be understood." That's the kind of power that lives on the other side of exhaustion. The power that comes from no longer needing to prove anything. The power that whispers, "I know who I am," and that's enough. When you've spent a lifetime giving, it can feel uncomfortable, even wrong, to shift the energy, to stop offering before you're asked, to say, "Not today," to rest, without apology. But what you'll notice, if you stay with it long enough, is that people start reacting differently. Not because you've trained them with threats or ultimatums, but because your presence has changed. Ethan told me something beautiful once. He said, "When I stopped being the fixer, my children started figuring things out on their own. And strangely, we got closer not because I did more, but because I did less with more love." That's the fourth piece of this change. Let go of control wrapped in care. Sometimes we give so much not only out of love, but out of fear. Fear that if we're not needed, we won't be valued. Fear that if we don't fix it, it'll all fall apart. Fear that our silence will make us invisible. But real connection isn't built on constant rescue. It's built on mutual presence. Helen began stepping back in small ways. She stopped offering advice unless asked. She didn't rush in to solve every problem. She allowed others to stumble, to figure things out. At first, she worried they'd think she didn't care. But over time, they began to call her just to talk, not for solutions, but for her voice, her presence, her peace. And that's what happens when you move from always giving to quietly receiving. Your relationships start to deepen, not weaken. Not because you're doing more, but because you're finally being. And here's the most beautiful part of all. You start to enjoy your own company again. You take yourself out for coffee. You buy the nice lotion, the good book, the little thing you used to say was too much. You look at your calendar and don't just fill it with obligations. You leave space for breathing, for wandering, for nothing at all. Because giving isn't just about what you offer others. It's about what you allow yourself to experience. And joy, simple, ordinary joy, becomes part of your life again. Sophie, who had spent years putting herself last, started every morning with a walk through her neighborhood. Not a power walk, not a fitness goal, just a quiet stroll. Birds, breezes, light through leaves. She told me, "It's the first time in years I'm doing something just for me." Without rushing, that's what restoration looks like. It's not always dramatic. It's often gentle. It's in the pause before you answer the phone. It's in the breath before you say yes. It's in the decision to stay home because you're tired, not guilty. It's in the knowing that your worth is not connected to how much you do, but how fully you are present in your own life. And when you begin living from that space, when you stop giving to avoid being forgotten and start receiving your own attention, the people around you begin to see you differently. Not because you've demanded it, but because you've changed the story. You are no longer the background character in everyone else's life. You are the steady, central presence in your own, and the ones who truly love you will rise to meet you there. They'll ask how you are, not because they want something, but because they want you. They'll offer help not because you seem weak, but because you finally seem open to receiving. They'll make space for you not because you forced it, but because your dignity now commands it, gently. So if you've ever wondered, what happens when I stop giving everything? Here's the answer. You come back to yourself, and from that place, the right things begin to flow toward you, not because you chased them, but because you made space for them to arrive. You don't need to shout. You don't need to plead. You don't need to overfunction for love. You only need to stand in your light calmly, fully, and let the world adjust. Because it will. Because it will. The moment you stop overextending just to feel worthy. The moment you choose to rest without guilt. The moment you say not today and let the silence settle without rushing to fill it. You begin to notice something extraordinary. You are still loved. You are still needed. You are still here not as someone's solution, or savior, or helper on demand, but as yourself, and that is enough. If you've stayed through this whole conversation, I want to thank you, not just for watching, but for choosing to stay present with these words, with your own heart, with the truth that maybe, just maybe, something inside you has been asking for change. I know what it feels like to give and still wonder if it's enough. To offer your time, your help, your care while quietly wondering if anyone truly sees you. And I know how lonely that can feel. But I want to tell you something now, softly and clearly. You are not alone. So many of us, especially as we grow older, reach a moment where we realize we've been living from obligation more than joy, where our yeses have become automatic, and our no's feel like betrayal, where we give until we're invisible. And if you've felt that way, I see you. If you're ready to give from love again, not from habit or fear, I invite you to begin. You don't have to change everything overnight. You don't have to explain your shift. You only have to begin with one small question. Am I giving from fullness or from fear? Let that question guide you. Let it remind you that love is not proven through exhaustion. Let it remind you that you're allowed to receive, that you're allowed to be cared for, that you're allowed to enjoy your own company, your own time, your own life without shame. And if this message stirred something in you, if a sentence sat in your chest a little longer than the others, I'd love to hear from you. Has there been a time in your life when giving left you feeling empty? Have you started making small changes to protect your energy, your peace, your presence? What has helped you restore balance? I invite you to share your story in the comments, even just a few words. You never know who might read them and feel less alone. And if this video made you feel seen, if it wrapped around that quiet part of you that's been carrying too much for too long, I'd be honored to stay connected. Click subscribe if you'd like. Not for the algorithm, not for the numbers, but because this space right here is for people like you, people who are learning, maybe for the first time, that giving and receiving are meant to dance together, that love is meant to flow both ways. And if there's someone you know, a friend, a sibling, a neighbor who's been giving endlessly without being seen, I hope you'll share this with them, not to give advice, just to say, I thought of you. You deserve more, because that's what this message is. At its heart, a reminder that you deserve more. More rest, more joy, more mutual care, more moments where your cup is full, not just so you can keep pouring, but because you deserve to drink from it. 2. You are not here to be consumed. You are here to live, fully, freely, lovingly. And when you begin to give from that place, that grounded, graceful place, the giving becomes beautiful again. Not because you have to, but because you choose to, and that is everything. Until next time, be gentle with your heart. Rest when you're tired, speak when you need to, and always, always remember, you are allowed to receive